Well, hello everyone. I'm Kirsten Cowan, an AE at Journal of Advertising Research, and I'm pleased to welcome the authors of one of our recently accepted papers, Virtual Reality Marketing. What does it mean to have a 3D experience? Effects of stereopsis on consumer perceptions and marketing outcomes. So please go ahead and state your name and affiliation one at a time for us.
Sure, yeah. So I can start. I am Dr. Alena Kostyk. I'm an associate professor of marketing at EDHEC Business School in France.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Sheng, and I'm an assistant professor at Macau University of Science and Technology.
Go on, Stephen.
Oh, me. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen Preston. So I'm the Deputy Head of Heritage and Culture at St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh.
And I'm Andrew Murchie. I'm a 3D and VR filmmaker. I run a business called Deep Vision Studios, and I'm based in Edinburgh as well.
Well, thank you again for joining us. In a few minutes, briefly tell us about your article and its findings.
Of course, yeah, I can, summarize it. So basically, you know how when you go to the movies, you sometimes get to see a film in 3D, and you would have to wear, the little special glasses, so you see the three-dimensional effects quite often. So something similar can be achieved in a variety of ways. And for example, in virtual reality, say by using VR headsets, you can achieve a similar effect. You can achieve a 3D, three-dimensional, or the technical term is stereoscopical visuals in the VR headset. And then you will see the world in VR like you see it in real everyday life, right? Because normally we see our world as three-dimensional around us. But there is a lot of VR content out there. There is a lot of brands that create VR content, and quite often that content is not actually three-dimensional. It would be 2D, two-dimensional. Think basically a regular movie. If you didn't get to see the nice three-dimensional film, just a regular flat image. So basically what our team was wondering is there a difference? Should advertisers be more interested in creating one version of VR over the other? The 3D VR, and I'm sure Andrew will talk about it eventually as well, but 3D VR can be a bit more, it might require a bit more technical knowledge. It can be a bit more expensive to create, to store, to manage. So is it actually worth it? Is it worth the effort? Is it worth learning how to do it? Should you use 3D VR? So that was the main core premise, the basics of it anyway. And what we did, we designed a series of studies to compare 2D and 3D VR. And we basically had the same VR experience of a very, very famous, those who have been to Scotland would all know it, but it's a very famous Scottish heritage brand, St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. And basically there were two versions of VR experience. They were exactly the same, but one was 2D and one was 3D. And then we ran 3 studies. 2 of them were in a controlled environment lab experiments, one of them pre-registered, and together about 150 participants between the 2. And then we did a large-scale field study with only about, I would say, 230 participants. And that was actually on site in St. Giles Cathedral with the visitors to the cathedral. And so the visitors took part in this between subjects experiment, and we did the same in the labs, where unbeknownst to them, they were either shown 2D or 3D VR, and then they answered the questionnaire with their perceptions and impressions so that we can do our statistical tests and compare the 2 versions. So that's kind of in the nutshell what we did and what the project entailed, but there were a lot of moving parts.
That sounds so interesting. So where did you get the idea for the article, the topic?
Oh, it actually came from Andrew. So we once had a coffee, I believe in Glasgow, and Andrew asked me this question. He said, "What do you think? Is there a difference? Maybe you could tell us why did you want to know?"
Well, I mean, I guess there's a multitude of reasons. I mean, I'm somewhat fascinated. I've been fascinated for years in stereoscopic 3D. So, it was just a natural interest. Um, my feeling always was when I did my test personally and when I showed friends that 3D always had something more about it, had something, just something more immersive, more engaging. There was something different, but it was very difficult. So I was really interested to know if there was already research out there. So obviously when you said that you'd look, but there wasn't particularly, it was really interesting to follow up. On the other side of it though, coming from a marketing agency background, and being a sort of an experienced stereographer meant that it actually gave us a USP if I could go out and sell 3D as being, something that we can deliver, because I know that it is quite tricky to do it if you've never done it before. So, it gave us a USP, plus it was giving the client the USP. It was giving the brand the option of actually, engaging at the deepest level. Or again, so I felt. I didn't have any research to back it up. So I think that's where I was kind of coming from. Personal interest plus, professional business interest. All around, it was just it was very interesting for me to find out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah, I was going to say, to be fair, we also didn't know the answer. So Andrew asked
yeah,
this question,
exactly.
and as academics, we also didn't know.
Yeah, so when we looked at academic literature for the answer to Andrew's question, we found that there was no clear answer. So we first conducted a systematic literature review to examine how VR stereopsis has been studied in marketing and advertising research, published between 2020 and 2023. We found significant inconsistencies. So first, some researchers define VR as a computer-stimulated technology, so intentionally excluding camera-filmed VR, which is widely used in some field, for example, tourism and social media advertising. While other researchers define VR as 3D, overlooking the fact that 2D VR exists and is widely used in, for example, creative businesses and marketing. So these consistencies make it difficult for us to compare findings across studies. Well, as well as there is a lack of conceptual clarity leads to how VR is studied. For example, some research designs fail to specify whether 2D or 3D VR was used, making it difficult to see whether the participants actually have a 2D or 3D experiences. For example, in some cases, researchers claim to use 3D VR, but in their stimuli, they use 360-degree YouTube videos. They're actually 2D. So this creates confusion and again, make it difficult for us to compare findings. Well, in addition, we found another major gap here is that the marketing research hasn't examined whether 2D and 3D VR produce different outcomes. To further explore this issue, we look at other research fields. Well, the studies in psychology and human-computer interaction suggest that 3D VR triggers higher emotional responses than 2D VR. But the marketing studies hasn't studies to investigate their different effectives. So based on our systematic literature review, we identified two key gaps that needs to be addressed. The first, to clearly distinguishing between 2D and 3D VR in marketing. And second, to investigate how 2D and 3D VR impacts key marketing outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. So in sum, we found that nobody knows the answer, not only us, and it really warrants investigation.
So, did you run into any challenges with this article? And if so, what challenges did you run into?
How was it for you, Andrew, the creation process? I think that was probably the biggest. I think it was probably the biggest kind of part of the project, right? The behemoth to actually make it, to actually create it.
Well, I mean, for me, it wasn't obviously that challenging because it's what I do on a day-to-day basis. But I guess that the challenge was firstly finding somewhere that we could shoot, a partner we could shoot with that would be worthwhile, that could really bring that sense of immersion. And I always, my sort of belief in this is when you're in a piece of good, well shot 3D VR, you feel like you're actually in that location. So it's always a good thing if you can have something you can offer where people don't normally have access to that area. So when I first went to see Stephen, we went up to the clock tower, and it was not only a fascinating story about the clock tower, but it was also the fact that it was tricky to get to. So for disabled users, it was completely inaccessible. And I think from what Stephen was saying, also like you had to have people to you had to have a guide to take you up there. And actually it felt, it's quite old. It felt like there would be health and safety risks. So anyway, so that aspect of it was I don't know if it was a challenge. Carrying the camera up and down, that was a little bit of a challenge. But overall it was great because Stephen knew his stuff, and it was done with relative ease. There is a kind of limitation when you're shooting in 3D in that you can't get too close to things, because of the way that the camera works. But yeah, apart from that, it's just it's a sort of standardized process that I have, so it wasn't too challenging.
I
And
think
also, I don't know if we cover this anywhere else, but also when you shoot in 3D, you natively or you naturally have a 2D version as well. Because when you're shooting in 3D, you create a video for the left eye and a video for the right eye, which means if you just show one of them to both eyes, it becomes a two-dimensional version. So that was pretty straightforward, as well, and easy to achieve.
I think Andrew is selling himself short slightly in that, from my perspective, as the subject of the video, I found that having someone as patient and as Andrew was probably quite important to that process. Because the two things he told me was it's quite hard to cut 3D video, and you can't have a prompt sheet anywhere. So if I was doing a reading off something now, I would have prompts either on my screen or behind my screen. You can't have that because it's taking everything. I suppose maybe touching on what Jie said and not getting bogged down, or sorry, the opposite, getting bogged down in what's 360 versus what's 3D. But yeah, I couldn't have a sheet. And I don't know, you might have just heard the bells go off in the background here. That was the other thing that Andrew and I had to try and fit what we were saying in between the bells ringing. So from my perspective, it was trickier than filming in just kind of normal like this. Filming in a 3D, it was interesting, and I had to kind of remember what I was saying, but also have it repeatable, and then also make sure that I didn't leave anything too hard for Andrew to cut. So that was the kind of the challenge on the filming side. On the sharing of it side, I was having a chat with Alena about this. We get 1.7 million visitors a year, and the end product is incredibly immersive. The 3D video is really, really good. We really like it. But the problem is, how do we share that with 1.7 million people? Because the headset, fantastic. But then do we clean it out after every person? So that's something I think we need to work out as a kind of a group as well, as to how do we share 3D video or 2D video, I suppose, with a mass audience.
Kind of implementation side, and I agree with you. I think it's a challenge that many heritage sites and museums run into, because it's a specifics of the equipment use. Overall, for you, was it an enjoyable experience? Do you think you would do it again? Would you recommend it to other brands?
Absolutely, I would absolutely recommend it. I think the experience of, Alena, it actually makes you drill down into exactly what it is you want to say, because if you don't have a prompt, you need to think about exactly what you're saying, and you need to be confident in what you're saying. And I think for us, as Andrew said, it's an area that people can't get to. So to share that with people, and especially people with accessibility needs, if we do end up opening the tower again as part of a larger tour, obviously going to the tower would be our number one. But if someone can't get to the tower, this is where we have the headset, which we can say, I'm sorry you can't make it there, but we have this alternative, which is going to get somewhere close, I guess. And there are nuances to it. For example, I can't do that talk every day. That we actually closed the tower because I wasn't able, my time just didn't stretch to doing that. So this is now almost the digital proxy of me, that people can experience me over and over again to their heart's content.
So how would you say that your findings could be used by industry? How would you say that the findings are super amazing, super interesting? How would they work in advertising?
So I would say basically we did get answers to some of our questions. We found that, you know, on the sort of a set of basic marketing outcomes, like the overall attitude towards the brand, the behavioral intentions, like the intention to visit or revisit the heritage brand, we actually found that 2D and 3D worked equally well. So if some brand perhaps cannot yet invest the time, energy, or resources in learning how to do 3D, they should not feel too bad. They might be just fine doing the 2D VR. But we did find that there are some critical dimensions when 3D is in fact superior, and that's on creating the sense of realism and what's known in marketing literature as telepresence. So it's this sensation of really being there, really being in VR, in that virtual space. So if you as an advertiser, if for your campaign, it's actually critical, and there are advertising campaigns where it is critical for experiential brands, for brand storytelling, you know, it might be that you really need and want to transport people to the place, then our recommendation as a group would be you probably want to go with 3D. It's very conclusive from our 3 studies that it's superior on those things. So I think that's kind of, from me, the main summary from that, if anybody else has any other thoughts.
Alena, that is important for us. And I remember you telling me a story at the time that there was someone who didn't believe that I was actually there, because I'm 6'4", what's that, 194 centimeters? And they said, oh, it was great that you got that robot to talk so well, or great that you got that avatar to talk so well. But given that I am here and I'm a real person, and St. Giles, it's important for our experiences to feel authentic, I would say that 3D and the authenticism, if that's a word, authenticity is what I'm looking for, is important for us.
Yeah, somebody did say that avatar looked so real. He looked like a real man. And I was like, he's a real man. We met him.
Andrew, do you have any kind of words of wisdom for advertisers?
That's a tough one. I mean, as as Alena was saying, if you can't stretch to 3D, then 2D VR is still pretty good. But if you really want to immerse someone, it's worth that extra benefit. I mean, most brands and companies that I know of wouldn't have their own VR anyway. So it's not like you're going to be shooting it yourself. You'll be bringing in either an expert or a production company. So you might as well push for that extra dimension so that you can, really put the person in place. I mean, many of the brands I've worked with, in almost every case, it's been putting people into a situation that you couldn't normally get to, whether it's taking someone to an Italian brewery, and we were taking it was toured the UK, so we couldn't afford to ship everyone to Italy to go and see this brewery, but we could take them into this 300-year-old building and show them it, and you could really immerse people. So just generally, if you're going to do it, you might as well do it, the best way you can.
Well put. So what ideas do you have for the future research in the area? What's next?
Well, I would like to share some exciting directions for future research in VR marketing. So the first, we can explore the differences between 2D and 3D across product types. So the effects of VR features on marketing outcomes might differ between like the hedonic products and utilitarian products. So future studies could examine how product types moderate these effects. The second, in our study, we identify 4 types of VR. So future research could compare these different VR formats to explore their effectiveness. Another key area I would like to share is that to investigate how multiple VR features interact. So beyond stereopsis, there are other aspects like interactions can influence consumer behavior. So understanding how these features work together could refine VR marketing strategies. Well, additionally, VR is a multi-sensory experiences. So far, much of the studies only focuses on the visuals. So future studies could investigate how incorporating like sound and scent could increase customer engagement and influence their decision-making process. And finally, much of the research now is conducted in lab settings. So like field experiment or any observational studies could provide more insight into how consumers actually interact with, the VR experiences in the real world environment. Yeah.
Well, thank
I
you
think
so much.
I think another area, and maybe that was one of the 4 types of VR that you were talking about there, Jie. One of the things that interests me still is the is comparison with VR 180 to VR 360, because a lot of production companies have gone into producing VR in 3D, but they've only shot VR 180. So it kind of means that you've only got half the sphere in your field of vision. As soon as you go like that, it's just a black box. Then it loses, well, to me, it loses the immersiveness. So I would also be interested to know then, that difference on a consumer of the 180 versus 360. Again, it's a similar question, but it's trying to understand what works best. If it turns out that I can offer a client something that's easier to produce and less costly to produce, and it has the same effect, then I would equally do that as long as it has the same effect, as long as it's as immersive.
Well, I'll definitely be excited to see what you work out next. So thank you so much for joining today. Have a great day, and yeah, looking forward to reading more.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thank
So
you.
much.